I'm Marianne Dugan. I graduated from this law school in 1993 with the Environment and Natural Resources Certificate as well as the Ocean and Coastal Certificate. And I'm currently a solo practitioner in Eugene and also a professor here, just an adjunct teaching this term, teaching public lands. And I got my start. I was lucky enough when I graduated that I was the first staff attorney for the Western Environmental Law Center, which had just moved off campus. It used to be just the environmental clinic on campus. And I stayed there for 6 years and then went into private practice, and I continue to do mostly public lands litigation and NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act litigation.
I'm Glenn Klein. I graduated here in 1982, also with a certificate in both ocean and coastal law and natural resources and environmental law. Currently, I'm the city attorney for the city of Eugene. I've been in this position officially for about 5 months now. Up until springtime of this year, the city contracted with local law firm Harangue Long, had for the last almost 40 years, and I had served in this role as city attorney for probably about the last 15. Before that, I had been up at the Department of Justice as an assistant attorney general, working with the natural resources section, the health and human services section. Last 3 years up there is with the special litigation unit. Big part of my practice since I joined Harangue Long has been doing environmental work primarily for public entities. City of Eugene certainly, and I continue to do the city's environmental work, but also a lot of work for cities, counties around the state. And so I had opportunities to work on brownfield projects from Astoria out to Oak Ridge, work on when the salmon got listed, work with cities and counties on how to deal with that. And so part of my practice is helping now the city of Eugene, before cities and counties, to comply with federal and state environmental regulations. But I also got to help the primarily cities create and enforce their own environmental regulations. And so I got to see both sides of it. As a private practitioner, I could work with a number of different local governments. Now as the in-house city attorney, it's the city of Eugene that's my only client. But still working on environmental stuff as well as other public law stuff.
I'm Jan Wilson. I currently work at the Western Environmental Law Center, which most of you know is the environmental law clinic here. I grew up in Michigan and kind of southeast lower Michigan. Went to school at University of Michigan and got an engineering undergrad. Worked in engineering for a while, and then maybe about 7 or 8 years later went back to law school. I was inspired to go to law school by two people, a book written by Carolyn Kennedy Schlossberg, and listening to the David Souter Supreme Court confirmation hearings, and thinking, oh my gosh, Joe Biden is so smart. I want to be like him. And so Joe Biden was my inspiration to go to law school. I had no idea. I have no lawyers in my family, so I had no idea what lawyers do, but I knew I wanted to go to law school. And I wanted to be smart like those guys. And it was great. I loved law school. It was very fun, and it's nothing like being a lawyer. So after 3 years, I figured I had to leave and figure out what I was going to do. My daughter was 2 months old when I started. She had just been born in July, and I started in August. So she was 2 months old when I started law school. And so she was only 3 and a half when I got out. I knew I had kind of wavered between child advocacy law and environmental law, knowing that I wanted to do public interest work, but not quite clear if I wanted to advocate for kids or trees, or maybe both. And so but I knew that I had come out here to, Lewis and Clark has a summer intensive program where you can take a whole semesters of stuff in 2 months in the summer, which was great because my kid was out of school and we could come out here for 2 months. I took classes. I had fallen in love with Oregon and said, I'm going to Eugene. My sister lived here at the time, and it was just amazing. The bike path sold us, and I could put my kid in the trailer bike and off we go. So I came out here, but because she still wasn't in school yet, I taught here at the University of Oregon in the legal writing program for a year until she was ready to go to school. And then I started kind of looking around to see what I wanted to do. And so I have had kind of a, circuitous path. I worked for I worked for a personal injury firm, Johnson Clifton, which is here in a small, they have like, I think 10 lawyers maybe at the most, here in Eugene. Did environmental injuries, I liked that, but private practice wasn't really for me. I did solo work for a while. I worked as an advisor for nonprofit organizations that I really like. I really found that I liked being in the nonprofit world. This year my daughter turned 16, she got her driver's license, she can get herself around, and so at that point I decided I was ready to look to go to WELC, to Western Environmental Law Center, which I had known Marianne for years, and she had told me a long time ago that WELC was not a place you really wanted to work if you had young kids, and I'd also heard that from Deb Mylander, who worked there all at the same time, because it just required so many hours, and it was just like working in a firm. It was like 80 hours a week, and when you have little kids, you can't really do that. Well, the cool thing about WELC is over the years, all those guys who were working there and had no kids and stay-at-home wives, and were working 80 hours a week, though they all got kids, and their wives started working, and all of a sudden, the work schedule at WELC became much more manageable for those of us with kids. And so, again, it was just a matter of waiting for the firm culture to kind of change, and I've been there since January. I love it. It's a great place to work. It's a great place to work if you have kids. It's a great place to work if you want to, save trees and cute little animals, and it's a great place to work if you want your kids to grow up and have clean air and clean air to breathe and clean water to drink. So it's pretty much a perfect fit for me, but it took me a while to get there.
My name's Gina Dobson. I graduated from the U of O in May of 2008, so I've been practicing for almost a year now, so hopefully I can find something interesting to say. I was actually pretty surprised that you guys invited me. Well, I don't really have a whole lot of experience, but hopefully you guys can identify with what a little bit of my path. I'm originally from Miami, Florida, so I can certainly relate to what the keynote was speaking about earlier. I still can't get my family to call it anything other than Oregon, so it's still a struggle. I've basically been interested in environmental issues ever since I was a Girl Scout. I studied it all my life, majored in environmental science in college, political science. Came out here thinking that I wanted to do nonprofit work or work for the government. I thought I'd work for the EPA or Sierra Club or something like that. Never, ever, ever expected to end up in a big firm. But I got the opportunity to work at Stoll Reeves after my first year, and they have a huge renewable energy practice, actually nationally recognized practice. So I took the opportunity and just love the people, love the work, love my clients. It is a lot of work. The hours are, sometimes difficult. But I absolutely love what I do, and I'm really grateful to be there. So that's kind of how I ended up where I am.
And this is Dan Cruz. We were just asking the panelists to sort of give an introduction to who they are, how they've come to environmental law practice, and
Sure.
Everything like that.
Well, my name is Dan Cruz. I graduated from this law school in 2006. I'm sorry I'm a little bit late. I was told the panel started at 1:15. Okay, good.
You jumped the gun.
And I am a staff attorney and legal director for the Cascadia Wildlands Project, a small local nonprofit organization based here in Eugene. Most of my work is federal environmental litigation, public lands related for the most part. I do a lot of suing the National Forest Service, the Bureau of Land Management, Fish and Wildlife Service. Any government agency, I like to sue them, and it's a lot of fun. I've had a lot of success, and I owe that in large part to people that came before me and inspired me to practice environmental law, and so I hope to pass that on a little bit today. Thanks.
Oh, and I wanted to mention to everybody, I didn't say at the very beginning that this is just an open session, so it's based on you guys asking questions about the profession, and so please feel free to raise your hands.
We have some prepared questions.
But yeah, this is it's about everybody, so just throwing that out there.
You want to go ahead?
Oh, yeah, I just want to know about like specific opportunities. What kind of cases exactly that you've worked on? I'm really curious to know, specifically what sort of cases you get involved in. more specific than just, suing the National Forest Service. Right. Like that.
You want me to start?
Yeah.
Sure. A lot of the lawsuits that we bring are under federal statutes, the National Environmental Policy Act, National Forest Management Act, or NIFMA, Federal Lands Policy Management Act, or FLPMA, the Endangered Species Act. We've dabbled a little bit in Clean Water Act stuff, but that doesn't, it's not a big part of my practice. One of the great opportunities that environmental lawyers have is to recover fees from the government if and when you prevail in these lawsuits, which enables me to essentially fund my own position with Cascadia. It's risky because you're not entitled to fees unless you prevail, and lawsuits can take many months and sometimes many years, and so you don't necessarily know what's going to happen until the end. But that's certainly one opportunity that I've been able to take advantage of through my work with Cascadia, is to recover fees and essentially give myself all that more job security in the process. A great opportunity I think that you have that I took advantage of when I was in law school here was the stipends that are given by OLSPIF and Friends of Land, Air, Water for public interest environmental work. I worked for Cascadia as a legal intern after my first year on an OLSPIF stipend, and I worked for another nonprofit with a FLA stipend the next year, and was able to get that experience and talk to people, meet people, have a great time without expecting a paycheck from the nonprofit that I was working for, which is rare, especially from a smaller group. So,
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth, fee shifting. It can take years and years to win a case against the federal government. And like Dan, I primarily do NEPA and the National Forest Management Act, NIFMA, and FLPMA, the Federal Land Policy Management Act, which governs the Bureau of Land Management. NIFMA governs the Forest Service. And then there's the Endangered Species Act, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the Freedom of Information Act. There's fee shifting for all of those statutes. And fee shifting means if you win, the government has to pay your fees at an hourly market rate. So you keep really good track of your hours, and then at the end you submit basically a bill, which then gets litigated over whether your hours were reasonable, whether your rate is reasonable. So I just last year finished litigation against the Forest Service regarding their Mount Ashland ski area expansion under the National Environmental Policy Act and NIFMA, and we won on appeal with a very conservative panel because we were right, apparently. And so I got my fees for 4 years of litigation for $56,000. And then there are times when you go for years and years and years and years and you get nothing. So like the Biscuit timber sales, which were the largest modern day timber sale, that was the largest modern day timber sale in Forest Service history. I counted 20 briefs that my friend Lauren Regan and I had to write, losing every step of the way, kept thinking, well, this one will be the one. But so we probably each put in 300 hours into those cases and didn't get a penny. So, it's a risky business, but it's really not that much riskier than, say, a personal injury practice where, even car accidents, which usually would be no-brainers. I stopped doing car accidents as a sideline because juries are stingy in Lane County, and insurance companies know it, and they won't settle. So, that's a risky way to make a living as well. Some of the cases I've worked on, because I worked at the Western Environmental Law Center, I had the opportunity to build up a good client base who knew my work, and when I left and went to private practice, they called me, and they still call me, and because they know I'll work for free usually, and they know that I can put on a good case. So I've done cases for the Sierra Club and smaller groups throughout the country. I'm doing a case in Pennsylvania right now regarding oil and gas drilling on the national forests, and doing a power line case in Kentucky. Who've done a lot of timber sale cases throughout the Pacific Northwest, land exchanges between the federal government and private. There's a really long list. I could really bore you, but there is a lot of opportunity to do that kind of law. Then Clean Water Act, as Dan mentioned, that's more of an urban practice. There frankly aren't that many point sources in Oregon, in at least the Eugene area, with Clean Water Act permits. But if you do find people who are violating their permits or who don't have permits, you can then sue and get fees from the polluter if you win. And we have a friend, Doug Quirk, who does that in Eugene as his practice. So there's a lot of opportunities to be a solo practitioner, but it's a bit terrifying, those months when the fees don't come in and you have to figure out which credit card you're going to rack up again, refinance your house. But I love it.
As a lawyer who represents primarily governments, my idea about fee shifting is a little bit different. That's true, you don't. There have been times where, working for a law firm that has more than just a single person in it, you can take on some of those cases which you're not sure whether you're really going to get paid, but I never had to worry about, am I getting a paycheck? I had to worry about whether my partners were going to be upset with me because we were racking up, well, in one case, about $150,000 in bills. We won the case, but the court decided that, no, we really shouldn't get our fees paid, and so we never recovered those fees. At a private law firm, it's not as easy to represent certain kinds of public interests because you have to worry about all the other clients that the law firm has. The bigger the law firm, the bigger problem that you have, but there's still opportunities. Harangue Long had, at least when I was there, had around 35 attorneys between its Eugene, Salem, and Portland offices, and we would occasionally get involved in what we considered public interest litigation. It wasn't on the environmental side. It was usually on some initiative that somebody decided to try to get on the ballot and then get passed, related to regulatory takings is one example, an initiative to try to reduce public employees' retirement accounts, and so we'd get involved in challenging those initiatives. And then there were, state statutes have fee-shifting type provisions where if you win on some type of public interest litigation, the court has the discretion, if it so chooses, to grant fees. Unlike a lot of the federal statutes, where if you win, you're supposed to get the fees. With the state statutes, it doesn't work quite that way. So representing the governments, and there have been very few cases that I've been involved in where my clients were actually sued in citizen suits, and so we didn't have to fight the fee-shifting issues. But involved on behalf of governments in Clean Water Act cases, Clean Air Act cases. Before I left the firm, one of my clients was the Lane Regional Air Pollution Authority, and so we get involved in the Clean Air Act type cases. Endangered Species Act, big issue when the salmon got listed. Have been working with those issues ever since those listings. NEPA comes up all the time for even local governments because a lot of the local government projects have some component of federal funds, and so you got to deal with NEPA. There are times when the local governments decide, we don't really like a project, and so we're going to go try to get involved in the NEPA process, basically on the side of the opponents, and so we'd also at times represent the same interests as some of the environmental groups, which for me was always a pleasure to be able to co-counsel something with one of those groups instead of fighting them. Brownfields redevelopment, the Superfund Act, CERCLA, RCRA, a lot of the issues I worked on at Harangue involved the brownfields redevelopments. And so it wasn't litigation so much as trying to use and work within those statutes to accomplish something. And just one example, up the city of Astoria, there was this bankrupt plywood mill owned by a co-op, 15 acres sitting right on the Columbia River. Had been used for about 40 years. Co-op went bankrupt, there was a fire, PCBs leaking into the Columbia River. EPA spent a couple $1 million trying to stop the worst of it. State DEQ spent some money trying to also stop some of that. And then the property sat vacant because nobody had the money, or it wasn't worth redeveloping the property. Property's worth clean probably about $1 million, somewhere between $8 and $10 million worth of liens and judgments against the property. Nobody could afford to go in and buy it. But the city of Astoria said, we don't like this 15 acres with this nice mill pond right on the Columbia River. It's just an eyesore. What can we do about it? And over the course of about 3 years, we figured out ways to get the federal government to release its liens, companies like Weyerhaeuser, the power companies to release their liens. Cities are able to do things because we're not motivated by profit, we're motivated by accomplishing some public purpose. And so we could go to those different entities, work with them to say, look, if we can redevelop the property, we're not doing it for profit. If we get any profit out of it, we'll split it between you guys any way you want. We just can't afford to pay you for your the cost that you have into it. You're never going to get those costs anyway. Would you work with us? And over the 3 years, the city was able to get all the liens released, get the property transferred into the city's hands, get DEQ to spend another $1.5 million cleaning up the property, turned it over to a developer who then had the obligation to finish the remediation. And today, if you go up there, got this really nice mill pond, the fish are coming back, the birds are coming back, some nice houses circling the mill pond. And so you have that kind of opportunity to accomplish something good. It's not through litigation. Most of what I've been able to accomplish that I would consider sort of the public good hasn't been through litigation. Representing governments, it's a lot easier to do that than if you're representing environmental groups, because a lot of groups will come to the feds, will come to the state, will come to the cities and say, would you please, please, please do something? That's not the best way to get somebody's interest. Oftentimes it takes litigation to get their interest, and so when you're representing environmental groups, a lot of what you're doing is suing the governments. If you have the opportunity to actually work for the governments, then you can help them accomplish that public good. And so a lot of the stuff that I've been doing has been on the non-litigation side, trying to use those same statutes to accomplish the public good, just in a very different way.
That's really interesting. I actually think of myself kind of in the middle there. But I don't really want to talk so much about the kind of cases that I have done in the past, because I don't think they're going to be that relevant. I think Jeff Smith was right. Things are changing. They're changing, huge changes. The big change was we actually have an administration at a lot of different levels. I mean, right now we're in Oregon, both houses of our legislature and our governorship are all held by pro-environment oriented interests, and that is pretty huge. There's still a lot of resistance on some of those appointed boards. I mean, the Department of Ag is still, the Board of Agriculture is still all pesticide industry guys, and the Board of Forestry is all, timber beasts. But there's a couple, there's like the one token person they put on there, the public interest person, is always like the one vote, But in general, there's still opportunities to sue the government, but there's not going to be as many in the future. And so to the extent we're relying on those, what they call the fee-shifting statutes, but they're basically where you're acting as a private attorney general. The idea is that you enforce the laws directly. That I don't think that's going to be a huge source of work in the future. I think Glenn's right. A lot more of it is going to be collaborative process. A lot more of it's going to be getting involved with the local governments. You file that litigation. I filed lots of litigation against Glenn's cities and counties because it gets you a seat at the table. And if you want something done, I could go and say, please, counselors, can you please do this? And they say, nah. And I say, okay, well, we'll sue you. And then they go, okay, we'll negotiate, And so, you get a one-story chopped off the hospital, and you get them to agree to stay downtown. And the only way we got to that point was by suing people. And so a lot of times you do have to sue them. But the goal isn't to win the lawsuit. The goal is to get a seat at the table to negotiate what you really want, which is the public good. And then this whole concept of what is the public good, I actually had Jill Jeleno, who works for Schwabe Williamson Wyatt, which is like one of the biggest developer firms in the entire state, tell me that she works for the public interest because, she helps the government stop from taking people's private property. And I'm like, okay, but the government is us, we the people. So, like, aren't we the public? I mean, in a lot of times, the government is the public interest. That's what the government's supposed to do. They're supposed to work in the public interest. So, to the extent you sue the government to get them to work in the public interest, then when they have things like eminent domain power and they can use it to do something good, like, save a wetlands, you actually want to encourage them to use the government powers that they have. So I don't see it as a clear line as like government bad, other people good, or, corporate industry bad. Well, corporate industry is bad generally, but there's nonprofit corporations are corporations too. So, to some extent, even that distinction. There's a lot of ways to look at what is the public interest, and I think what's really most important is that in your heart what's good, and everybody knows in their heart what's sustainable. If you're living beyond your means economically. If your income is a little bit lower than what you're racking up on your credit cards, that's not sustainable. If we're doing that at the national level, if we're doing that at the state level, it's not sustainable. Same thing works for the environment. If we're taking out more oil than, is being produced as dinosaurs fossilize, it's not going to work. Long term, we've got to figure out how to ratchet down our consumption of everything. And to the extent you can encourage that in whatever way, you're working in the public interest. And that could be, I think the most important thing you guys can do as young lawyers is exactly what Jefferson Smith said: get on the boards of nonprofit organizations. Every single nonprofit organization I know of, their boards are primarily retirees and baby boomers. And baby boomers who don't really even show up at the board meetings very often because they've got all kinds of stuff going on. They got kids, they got grandkids, they got whatever. Retirees, yeah, they're great because they have lots of time, but the retirees aren't going to last forever, and we are always trying to recruit young people to these boards. And to the extent we can get young people on the boards, we can get fresh ideas and do things different ways. So a lot of the opportunities is just public service in that way, on being on nonprofit boards and getting involved with nonprofits, and it may or may not be litigation. Litigation is a tool, but it's not the goal.
So I'm going to give a little bit more background about the energy industry, because it's sort of like a different entity all unto itself, and it's very different from anything that at least I learned in law school. When I was here, there was one class that was just being taught for the first time on renewable energy law, and it couldn't, in the amount of time that we had, provide an overview of the industry. I don't really do litigation. We primarily represent renewable energy developers. Historically, we've represented a lot of the utilities, and we still do some of that, but a lot less than we did in the past. And so we do mostly transactional work for them, and actually quite a bit of regulatory work. We also follow a lot of different legislative developments, helping push for renewable portfolio standards and tax incentives for renewable energy projects so they can be cost competitive against fossil fuels that have been subsidized for generations upon generations. One of the things that I just wrapped up that was actually probably the most significant thing that I've worked on since I've been at the firm was the rate case, the Bonneville Power Administration rate case. We represented a coalition of wind developers and the Renewable Northwest Project, which is a nonprofit in the Northwest that advocates for renewable energy, because Bonneville, okay, just step back. Bonneville is a federal power marketing agency. It's a subset of the Department of Energy, but it sort of has a lot of authority to do its own. It operates a lot of the hydroelectric dams around here and a lot of the transmission system. And because wind is a variable resource, it doesn't always blow as much as it's going to on schedule. Bonneville has to provide hydro reserves so that it can balance the wind when the wind isn't matching its schedule. Well, in the past, they haven't charged for this, and in the last couple of years, without making any real operational improvements, all of a sudden they decided that they were going to charge the wind generators an exorbitant amount of money for this, and it was to the point where it was going to be cost prohibitive for wind development to happen in the Northwest. There was a settlement agreement in the 2009 rate case, which was specifically on wind integration, that the wind developers had really pushed for Bonneville to look at its own practices, get some folks devoted to wind integration, and come back with something better for this last rate case. Well, what they proposed was a 300% increase. the rate for transmission service. And for those that don't know, transmission is basically just being able to get the power from the wind farm or whatever renewable energy source to the grid and to consumers. And so obviously 300% is a lot of money, and it was, you know, the wind community was outraged. So we represented a coalition of folks, and we ultimately got them to cut that more than half. And also, they now have about 40 full-time staff, I believe, devoted to wind integration issues. And they are finally committing to implement a lot of these operational advances that'll bring the costs down instead of just passing it all to the wind community. So that was a big thing that we worked on. The BPA was the first what's called balancing authority of its kind to impose such a rate on its wind developers, but this issue is starting to crop up all over the country. Is for those people who follow renewable energy, you know, transmission is one of the biggest constraints to having more renewable energy on the grid. So it's one of the big things being talked about in a lot of the different entities that do what BPA does in providing these balancing services. So those are the kinds of big issues to look out for. And in terms of, for those of you who are interested in doing renewable energy work, obviously, you know, it's become more and more competitive to get jobs at big firms, but there's a lot of great, you know, entities in Oregon, the Oregon Department of Energy, the Energy Trust of Oregon, the Renewable Northwest Project. A lot of the developers have offices in Portland. So I encourage you to try to get internships there. I know with the Portland program, there's great opportunities to do that, and some folks have actually managed to end up with jobs out of those internships. So that's one thing that I really encourage you guys to try to do if you're interested in that area.
The name of our symposium this year is Passion into Practice. And how important is it to be passionate in the practice of environmental law? Do you consider that to be a strength in all situations? Is it sometimes a weakness? Does it sometimes create frustration in your legal career? I mean, how important is it to be passionate about what you're doing?
Can I start?
Yeah.
Sure. I think it's extremely important. I think, but for my desire to do this, I probably would have gone crazy a long time ago. I mean, it's, you know, I could be making several times more money than I am doing something that I'm not passionate about. And to me, it's worth it to practice environmental law because I love doing it. Love the people I work with. I love getting to go out into the woods, field check areas, lead people on hikes. You know, it's a great feeling. I don't, you know, I worry about, you know, my income, and that's not a secret. You know, I mean, I worry more than a lot of other lawyers. You know, every year we get a brochure, or maybe it's every couple of years. You know, it breaks down by, you know, by age and when you graduated, like the average salary of a lawyer, you know, in Oregon, and you look at it, and you know, it's tempting to just like want to grab it, you know. You know, you realize how little you're making compared to what other people that are similarly situated to you are. There is an opportunity, I think, to be successful financially as an environmental lawyer. But for me, I kind of judge my success by the passion that I put into it and the enjoyment that I derive from it. I think the passion is a really important part. I think well, there are definitely passionate lawyers on all sides, but I think often it distinguishes me from lawyers that are representing other parties. You know, like that's why I win sometimes, I think, because I care about it and I'm willing to spend more time combing through the record to find the information that we need, or other people want to clock out at 5 o'clock. And that's a generalization, like I said, there are passionate lawyers on all sides of it, but I think that the more passion you have for something, the more likely you are to succeed, regardless of the challenges of the practice. It can be challenging practicing in the public interest. It can be very rewarding. Those often go kind of hand in hand. It's a big part of every day in my life. So.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with what Dan said. I think in any career you have to try to keep passionate about your work, or you're just going to get burned out and you're going to get either bored or you're just so overwhelmed that you just can't do it. And I have to say that's why I left Wilk for a lot of reasons. It was just kind of the same case over and over and over again, plus it was a huge amount of hours. actually can't say I'm working less hours now, but my daughter's grown up now, so. But yeah, I think you have to stay passionate. I think that, this might sound a little weird, but I think as a woman, I try to moderate my passion in the courtroom, because I think, especially somebody like me with kind of a small voice, and I'm kind of short, I come out maybe seeming a little shrill or like, hysterical. I was giving a closing argument in a trial on Tuesday, not an environmental case, and I was running out of breath because I was so nervous, and I started to sound like I was going to cry, and I wasn't, and it really pissed me off. So I picked up a glass of water and I drank a little, and I said, I'm not getting emotional, I'm running out of breath. I had to explain that because I think, I think there is a risk of being viewed as just kind of like really like passionate about what you're doing, but not necessarily knowing all your facts. So you absolutely have to have your facts if you're going to win environmental cases. You have to know what page of the 30,000 page administrative record your key facts are on. But on the other hand, if you're not passionate and you're just kind of droning on and giving just the facts, then you're not going to move the judges to do the right thing either and to pay attention.
I agree with what's been said. Having now practiced law for longer than most of you have been alive, which I was thinking about as I was walking over here today, and it's like, boy, that's scary. I didn't realize I was that old. Passion about what you're doing, I think, is critical. You spend so much of your life working, you might as well enjoy it. I have been very fortunate between what I've been able to work on when I was at the Justice Department, at the firm, and now the work that I get to do for the city of Eugene. Almost always I have enjoyed what I have worked on, and to me, and I have put in lots of hours when I was at the AG's office, in the private firm, now, and it was never because somebody was saying you have to put in more time. It's because I cared about what I was working on. I wanted to do a really, really good job. I don't like to lose if I'm litigating, and that requires a lot of effort. I wouldn't have been able to do that if I didn't really care, if I wasn't passionate about what I was doing, practicing law, practicing in the area that I want to practice in, being given the freedom to sort of choose what it is I want to work on. When you're in a private law firm, when you're in-house, when you're representing a corporation, when you're representing a government, I can't speak if you're representing the sort of the public interest. I'm more of a public service lawyer than a public interest lawyer. My passion is in what I do, but I try very hard to keep out of the advice that I'm giving my clients my personal feelings. Most people at my firm, most people at the AG's office, most people in the city of Eugene have no idea how I'm registered to vote, have no idea what my personal interests are. Do I want to save squirrels and trees, or do I want to shoot squirrels and cut down trees? It's
I know.
Because part of my job is to help the clients accomplish their goals. And this is really true as a government lawyer. We all elect people to represent us. The last thing I want is some lawyer who has his or her own agenda trying to tell the government, this is what you need to be doing, trying to tell the elected officials, well, I think you really need to be going this way. If it's a legal reason for going that way, that's one thing. But if I have, a personal interest in saving trees, and the city is saying, okay, so what legally must we do? And I say, oh, legally you absolutely have to do this and this and this in order to save these trees. I'm not going to be a very effective lawyer, because as soon as the elected officials or the city staff realize that I'm not giving them straight up legal advice, I'm shading my legal advice in order to accomplish my own personal means or my own personal objectives, they're going to stop listening to me. Now, it happens that most of my clients have interests that coincide with my own, which is why I keep doing the kind of work that I'm doing. I like to save trees. I mean, one of the best things I ever worked on 10, 15 years ago, there were a bunch of developers who heard about the city and the county's attempts to impose additional regulations on cutting trees. And so they thought, okay, well, before those regulations get into effect, we better cut the trees so that we're not violating the law. And it takes government a little time to act. I mean, there are processes we have to follow, public hearings, and give people a chance to comment before we can get a new regulation into effect. And so the trick was, how do we keep people from cutting the trees while we're trying to do that? Had a blast coming up with a very interesting theory that actually worked, and we convinced people, start cutting we filed a lawsuit, and we said, if you keep cutting those trees, you're violating this temporary restraining order, even though they weren't defendants in the case. Stop everybody from cutting the trees. The city and county adopted the new regulations, and so now we can look to the south, and the trees are still there. But it was my client that said that was their objective. It was nice that their objective coincided with my own. But it's a real key as you go into your legal practice, you are representing your clients. Give them the best legal advice you can, but if you start shading your legal advice to accomplish your objectives rather than your clients', then you are going to not be a very good lawyer, and you won't be a lawyer for those clients for very long, because they're going to realize they can't trust what you say. And as a lawyer, what you say is all you got. Your reputation is everything. So be passionate about what you do, but make sure that you're not injecting your personal beliefs into advising at least governments and private businesses, if that's where you wind up.
I totally agree with that last part. Your credibility is everything. I never will go into a courtroom, especially where I practice mostly in land use law, so you go in front of the same three people on the Land Use Board of Appeals, for years. And if I go up there and give them a really lame argument on something I don't believe in, they're going to know it. And the next time I give a really good argument, they're going to go, she might be doing that lame thing again. So if there's something that I'm doing that's lame and the other side brings it up, I'll generally say, all right, we're going to concede on that point. We got these other three things that are really solid. And so I think it's really important to maintain your credibility and not overstate your case because of your passion. That said, one of the great things about working for nonprofit organizations is you don't have clients. A nonprofit organization is your client, and it has a mission statement. You can go right on its website and read that mission statement. If you don't agree with that mission statement, you shouldn't be working for that nonprofit. And so I always am passionate about every single case and every single client, because we only can take cases that are within our mission statement. And so if a case comes into WELC, there's no way I'm going to not be passionate about it. And Dan was exactly right that your passion, you have to really love your job. You have to love what you're doing. You have to love your clients. You have to know in your heart that you're doing the right thing. And you have to not read those stupid surveys that come out every year, because I have been practicing law for, I graduated in 96, so I guess 13 years now. This is the very first year that my salary has been higher than what I made the first year out of engineering school in 1984. So seriously, I look at those things and I'm like, oh my God, law clerks in Portland are making 5 times what I'm making. It's just, you can't read them. Don't worry about it. You're not worried about the money. You're not in it for the money. If you're in it for the money, you're in the wrong place. There's no way you're ever going to have a lucrative career working in the public interest. If you're looking at financially lucrative. If you're looking for experiences, I know I have been on more whitewater rafting trips. I have been mountain climbing in some amazing areas. I get, just going out and seeing my clients' sites. I'm like, ooh. We had a big discussion a couple weeks ago at WELC. We were talking about some of the wind power things they're trying to put in Steens Mountain, and everybody immediately emailed, I'll do the site visit. It was like, so, there's some other definite rewards for working in the public interest. I've been for years been up against developer attorneys, and developer attorneys, one thing that's kind of a little hidden, I guess everybody knows it, but nobody talks about it, is the fact that sometimes developers, when their stuff goes bankrupt, they can't afford to pay their attorneys, so what they do is they just give the attorneys like a parcel in whatever subdivision it is. So developer attorneys own houses all over the place. You know, they have a house in Hawaii, a house in, you know, Boca Raton, you know, all over the place. They have these little vacation homes. And I've never, you know, I have my third mortgage on my little ranch in Eugene, you know, and it's, you know, a mortgage to the hilt so I can pay for my public interest lifestyle, which is great. But just last year, some people we were working with over in Central Oregon, they're farmers, but they happened to have inherited a beach home out in Oregon, and they were out on the coast near Newport, and they came out through Eugene, and they stopped off and they dropped the key on my desk, and they said, now you have a beach house in Newport, you can go there whenever you want. So I now have a beach house. I never have time to actually go there. I've only been there twice, but it's, you know, it's like, you're not going to have all the spoils of working in the private sector, but that's not really going to be all that important to you, because, you know, I can take my vacations on a boat in the Hawaii and be just as happy as I would be at some, you know, mansion in Sun River.
I just want to go on the record and say that there's a difference between the sort of real estate mogul developers that she's talking about and the renewable energy developers that we represent. I don't have any vacation homes anywhere, and I don't know anyone in my practice group that's gotten a vacation home from one of our developer clients. If they do, then I'd like to know about it. I think regardless of what type of practice you're in, whether it's you're representing the government or a nonprofit or working at a firm, practicing law is really stressful, period, and there's different kinds of stresses associated with it. You know, some people worry about how much money they make. I don't personally worry about paying my bills, but I do worry about the amount of hours that I'm putting in, the effect that that has on my health. So there's different trade-offs associated no matter where you work. And part of that, too, is just because you're not just worried about yourself and your own responsibilities, but you have a fiduciary duty to your client. So it's not like when you wake up, you know, the day after Thunbar and you're hungover and you don't feel like going to class, the only person that you're hurting by skipping class is yourself. But if you wake up in the morning and you have, your client is counting on you to get something done, you can't just say, well, I don't feel like going today. It's too bad. You got to go because they're depending on you. And if, you know, whatever I'm feeling, I just think about the end in sight and what my client is ultimately trying to accomplish, whether it's, you know, wind farm or solar development or whatever it is. And so even if I'm, you know, there's days that I will spend hours poring over one provision in one agreement, and they're not always riveting. You know, insurance provisions are a little bit boring sometimes, but at the back of my mind, I know that if I do a good job on that, that it'll get the client one step further to putting in their renewable energy project in and displacing some of the fossil fuels that are, you know, doing the damage that they're doing to our environment. So I think you have to have that passion, and it, you know, that passion is ultimately knowing what your client's goals are and being able to keep that in mind to get you through the days that are sometimes, you know, some days more difficult than others. On the other hand, there are days that everything I work on is fascinating and I'm learning a lot, and I'm, you know, really grateful to be doing it. But for the tougher projects, you know, again, it's just, you really, I think you need that passion always to.
It's fun to kind of joke about how little we make sometimes, but I really don't want to leave anybody with the impression that you know, you have to go bankrupt to be a public interest lawyer. It's doable. I mean, it takes more effort, and I think it takes that, you know, increased level of passion to do it. But it's doable, and it's something that, you know, you put your mind to. You get motivated to do it. You're inspired by the work that you're doing, and you can make it happen financially. You're not going to be rich, but you can.
One last question, and I kind of want to keep the answers brief because I think we're supposed to be done at is it 2:50? Just what advice would you give on career paths to students interested in environmental law, and then we'll open it up for questions after that.
What advice? I think that the most valuable thing that I had was mentors, including some people at the table here and others all over the place. And it's something that you can't really put a price tag on. I graduated law school and started working for Cascadia right away, and I was the only lawyer on staff, so I didn't have a supervisor, I didn't have a partner above me telling me how to do things, what to do, and so I really heavily relied on people that I met while I was in law school, people I volunteered for or worked for, or just knew. I always always, and still always have co-counsel. I mean, I've been practicing for 3 years now, and I still think it's very worthwhile to have a more experienced attorney at the table with you. Even if I can do the research and understand the law, just to have somebody explain the decorum courtroom that I haven't been in before, or the way to file. I just filed my first brief in the 9th Circuit, and you have to know how to do that the right way. I had to file it twice actually. Footnotes were not in 14-point font. Refile the whole thing, including 10 copies of the 70-page brief. But with the right type of mentorship, the right type of relationships, I think that you can really help yourself and come a long way. What else? I would really encourage you to take advantage of the grants and stipends that are available through the law school. I know I've said that already, but that's a great way to work for organizations that would not otherwise be able to fund a position for you. Keep your head up and have fun. I mean, go to the places you're working to protect, or see the things you love. Stay lighthearted if you can. There's a lot of really depressing things that go on that we're fighting against, and it's easy to get bogged down in it, but there's a lot of good stuff too.
Sorry, got a piece of pepper from lunch that was floating around in my mouth. Go ahead.
I think mentoring is a great idea. I think that's real helpful. The other thing I'd suggest to you, when I was a first-year student, Ralph Nader came to speak here, and one of the things he said, which was great because it gave me an excuse to do what I wanted to do, he said, bar classes, bar courses, you can take those, you can study that stuff after you graduate law school. Don't worry about taking them as second and third year students. Take something you're interested in. If you're interested in environmental law, take the environmental law classes, take the environmental law clinic, find an internship, an externship while you're in law school. I had an internship with the Oregon Senate Committee on Water Resources during law school. That was great, eye-opening, got a lot of good experience. I got an externship my third year with a federal judge that turned into my first 2 years of legal career as a judicial clerk. My third year I had a National Wildlife Fellowship, Federation Fellowship, that gave me an opportunity to do a bunch of research and writing. I was passionate about environmental law. I figured I'm going to take all those bar classes, I'm going to learn all that bar stuff. When it comes time to actually pass the bar, this is an opportunity, it's your last opportunity to learn about what you're really interested in. Take advantage of that. Take classes you're interested in, take classes from professors you find exciting. You will forget most of the knowledge that you're learning in law school. You hopefully will remember all of the skills that you're developing in law school. When I hire lawyers, and I've hired a bunch of them, I don't really care what classes they took in law school. I want to know what they can do. If they know how to figure out the law changes. They'll figure it out. If they don't know how to figure out the law, but they remembered everything they were taught in law school, that knowledge is obsolete probably before you get out of law school. Learn the skills, have fun, take classes in environmental law. Do that, get those connections, and it will be much easier to get a job in the environmental law area.
I'm okay now. Sorry. I agree with what Glenn just said. I didn't take very many bar classes, and then I did the Barre, and I was shocked to find that the classes I had taken, I'd totally forgotten everything about them anyway, so you're going to need to do that. If you want to have a solo practice at some point, you probably should take evidence and trial practice, unless you really, really, really can't imagine yourself in the courtroom, because if you're a solo practitioner, you're going to end up in the courtroom and do as much appellate. I don't know if there's extra appellate practice classes in this law school at this point. And also, if you're going to do solo practice, you should try to develop something else that you're interested in other than environmental law, because frankly, I do all kinds of stuff to try to make money, and I don't do everything, but I do a lot of different things like property disputes, easements, boundary disputes, which are interesting to me, and people pay by the hour for protecting their property. Divorce, I don't do that, but if you have any inclination, it's an hourly job a lot of times. And criminal law is also can be an hourly paying job or flat fees. So if you have any interest in those kinds of areas, you should get some practice in that and do as much real-life stuff as you can, clinics and externships.
Every job I've ever gotten was through knowing somebody. When I first had left, when I first came out to Oregon, the only thing I knew about, I went to law school in Michigan, so the only thing I knew about Oregon was that the answer to every question on any environmental law or admin law or constitutional law essay exam was the ONRC case, because there were so many ONRC versus the Forest Service, ONRC versus whatever. And so when I came out here, Oregon Natural Resources Council was the first place that I looked up, because I thought, wow, these guys are amazing. They've won a lot of cases, and there's like spotted owl and NEPA cases and all that stuff that Marianne was working on, and at Welk. And so I went and found the ONRC office, which at that time had one person, and it was Doug Hyken, and coincidentally, his daughter is the same age as mine, so we went hiking and talked about, cows in the streams and clear cutting and all kinds of things, and he gave me a few little projects. Well, lo and behold, 3 years later, when I really decided I was going to be a lawyer, Doug's wife, Marilyn, called me up one day and said, "We're having a crisis over here at the law firm. The first lawyer that walks through the door is going to get hired." And I walked through the door, and they're like, "Oh, we were just looking for you." And so it was great. I had put in an application when they had an opening a while earlier, but they never got around to actually interviewing any of those people because they were in the middle of a crisis. And so some months had gone by, and I assumed they had already hired someone else, and they just never gotten around to it. So that is the same. It works the same for me now. All of the students that intern or clinic with me during the summer, all my summer interns, I keep in contact with them. They keep in contact with me. They let me know what they're interested in. I have kind of a running spreadsheet of who's interested in working in Alaska, who's interested in working in Utah, who's interested in wetlands, who wants to do land trust stuff. And when I see postings, I immediately send them, and I see the postings, and you guys don't get them, but I do. And I can send them and say, here, Susie, here's something I know you'd be interested in. If you're still looking to work in this area, it's available. All those opportunities are going to come to you because of people you know. So network. Keep in touch with all your, whoever you clinic and intern for, all those internships, keep in touch with the people. The other thing is, like Glenn, I was given advice, again, in law school. We had a number of environmental law classes, but only one environmental law professor, so he taught everything. And I worked for him during this summer, and he would say, well, what do you want to do if we don't have a class? Let's just do an independent study project. So one year I was really interested in brownfields redevelopment because, I lived in Detroit, and there's a lot of brownfields that need to be redeveloped, and nobody really seemed to have any idea how to do it. And so I said, well, I want to study how you do brownfield redevelopment, and I'd already taken the CERCLA class, so I kind of had an idea of what CERCLA would allow, but I didn't really see how you could actually do it. And so he said, great, 3 credits, independent study, go do it, write it up, and so I got credit for it, and I got a better connection with that professor, and I got to learn something I was interested in. So if you can't find a class about whatever you're interested in, just go to some professor and say, I want to do this, will you sponsor me for independent study? And then, again, keep in contact with those people when you make those contacts.
I think everybody's given really great advice. I'll just add some points on specifically to the renewable energy industry. As I mentioned earlier, there's a huge network in Portland of just different organizations, Renewable Energy Business Network, Renewable, Wind Drinks, which is a happy hour group of wind industry folks that get together. There's just all sorts of different events like that get together and talk about policy or whatever's happening in the industry. And the more that you can put yourselves out there and make contacts with people, the better opportunities you'll have. LinkedIn is a great resource. For some reason, the renewable energy industry is all over LinkedIn. There's all these groups, different advocacy groups, and we talk about policy, and we follow what's happening, and so that's a great way to stay connected to people. And I see a lot of job postings actually on the American Wind Energy Association, the marine renewables. I see a lot of job postings come through. I don't exactly pay attention to them because I'm not looking for a job, but sometimes I look for friends and things like that, and there's quite a bit out there. I actually spoke with our lawyer recruiting manager yesterday because since I haven't been practicing very long, I figured she would probably have some better advice on people that are looking for jobs. As you guys know, it's with the economy the way it is, it's gotten a lot more competitive, so grades are obviously a really easy way to distinguish people, but that's going to be more important for some positions more so than others. They're also looking for good work experience. So whether it's before law school, or for some of you, like me, I only took a year off in between college and law school. So to the extent that you don't have that kind of a long work history, they're looking for involvement in student organizations, leadership positions, things that you can show to differentiate yourself. But also pick things that you're passionate about. I think they have been doing it long enough that they can recognize when people are just throwing things on their resume to have a line on there. Just be involved in things that you're genuinely interested in, and I think that will come through when you're interviewing and meeting people, and that will help you stand out a lot to say, I was one of the co-chairs of the Public Interest Environmental Law Conference or something like that. They know how much work goes into that, and I think those kinds of things are important.
All right, we want to open it up for questions in the 5 minutes we have between now and our diverse practice setting, which we would like to encourage everyone to stay and see. It's going to be really interesting time. So, any questions for any of our panelists?
What fields and what aspects do you see that policy is most lacking or overly restrictive to the advancement for sustainable energy?
Water law. Water law is ancient. It needs to be overhauled. Nobody's done it yet. Nobody's willing to take it on. It's a state-by-state slog, but water law is based on the premise that there is a certain amount of water, and as you know, with global warming every year, that carrying capacity shrinks. And water law doesn't reflect that shrinking reality. I've been to land use hearings in Michigan County where they say, well, our water comes from the Cascade snow melt, and there's plenty, it's infinite. And I just look at them going, glaciers that have never melted in 10,000 years are melting. What is wrong with you people? So really, water law is a big, huge area, and I don't know anybody who's taken it on, but it's the future.
Yeah, I agree. That's one of the big crises. I think, again, I had already mentioned earlier, transmission is a huge constraint with renewables. Another area, when we talk about combating climate change, that there's the biggest payoff for the least investment is energy efficiency. So I think that's one area that there could be a lot more being done than there is right now.
So, no offense, Gina, because we know firms are for some people, but for a lot of young public interested students, firm is sort of a four-letter word. I'd be interested in hearing your perspectives about working for a firm, a young lawyer maybe needing to get experience, but with nonprofits not hiring. How serious do we take that decision? Is it bad if we go work for a firm to gain experience because there's just not enough? Well, I have a friend who works for a very small law firm. It's like 5 people, and it's mostly business and divorce and bankruptcy. But he was told he can do any environmental case that comes his way, which isn't that many, but I send him cases. And so if you can find kind of a smallish firm, I think you get a little more stability and safety net financially, and also you have other lawyers to bounce things off of. And if you can get a firm like that, if you can get into a firm like that that will let you do public interest law, then that seems like a good way to start out.
I learned a lot about how to run a law firm working at a for-profit law firm. And when I went there, it was a personal injury firm, and they allowed me to do environmental injuries, so it worked out okay. I learned a lot, and I have a lot better sense of what it takes to run a nonprofit law firm in a good way because of those 2 years I spent. I wouldn't spend more than 2 years at it, but don't get sucked into the partnership track. But it definitely, you can learn a lot at a firm in a real short amount. It depends on which firm and what you're doing.
And if I can add something to that, I think I have worked with a lot of attorneys for a lot of public interest firms. I've worked with a lot of attorneys for a lot of governmental entities, including like Environmental Protection Agency, the state agencies. I agree. 2 or 3 years of experience, even at a big firm, is not going to detract from most employers. They're going to look at that and say, that's great experience. We can rely on that glad you got trained by somebody else. We didn't have to train you. You had some of the highest paid, best lawyers in the state train you. So if you're doing it for a couple of years, I would be surprised if that was a demerit when you applied for someplace else. You'll need to be able to explain why you were there, what you were trying to accomplish. Here's my real interest. You simply saw that as a stepping stone to getting the job that you really want.
And can I add one thing? Sorry, I feel like I really have to say something here. I think particularly at schools like University of Oregon where it's so public interest focused, and that's great. I mean, that was part of why I came here originally. I think there's a misconception about, I think there's just an across-the-board stereotype that's drawn about big firms that's not entirely accurate. I mean, some of the most inspiring people that I know, and politically extremely liberal and just donate tons of time and money to charity, work in my firm, and I absolutely have so much respect for them. And I think people need to be a little bit more open to the idea that not every big firm or, practice group in a big firm is evil and doing the devil's corporate work. And another thing that's important to keep in mind is that a lot of and I don't know specifics on these nonprofits, but you have to think about, and a lot of the nonprofits that everyone thinks are so perfect get their money from big corporations that are helping to fund them. So I think, and even with the government, I mean, the governments are influenced by lobbyists as well. So I think the picture is not so black and white. That's not to, I think the work that the people do in those nonprofits is absolutely amazing. But that doesn't mean that the money is coming from somebody who's an angel either. So I think it's just important to be a little bit more open-minded and realize that the real world is not so black and white, that it's a lot more gray than you're led to believe when you're coming into school and you're really idealistic and you want to accomplish certain things. So that's my defensive reaction to your comment. I'm sorry. But I feel like it had to be said.
So we'd like to encourage everyone to stay for the next panel, but let's have a round of applause.